Hudson Institute's Bradley Center for Philanthropy and Civic Renewal. And Kristen McIntyre and I welcome you to today's panel discussing the likely impact of the 2010 elections on foundations and the nonprofit sector. A special welcome to our viewers watching us via live streaming, which I understand we have some 60 folks on that little camera in the back. It will now be a regular feature of the Bradley Center panels. But as I pointed out before, that does not absolve you from the responsibility of showing up live from time to time. And we feed you, so that's something that you don't get on live stream. Shortly after the 2010 election returns came in, the Council on Foundations sent around its first assessment of the meaning of the results for foundations. As that memo noted, we will have 110 new members coming to town in January who need our attention. As a sector, our immediate task is to educate a very, very large class of new members about philanthropy and its role in society. Writing in the Nonprofit Quarterly magazine, the always thoughtful Rick Cohen suggested, far more bluntly, that nonprofits as well as foundations had quite an educational task before them. As he argued, the election was, quote, brutal, not just for the Democrats who took it on the chin, but for the whole of the nonprofit sector. The incoming freshman class of Congress represents a sea change for nonprofits, the election of dozens of policymakers with scant experience with much of the nonprofit sector they will be charged with governing, end quote. So what have we as foundations and nonprofits to hope and fear from this new Congress? That's the question we'll tackle today with a panel of commentators who make it their business to pay careful attention to developments on the Hill. First, we'll hear from Dean Zerbe, National Managing Director of the Alliant Group here in Washington, D.C., and former Senior Counsel and Tax Counsel to the U.S. Senate Committee on Finance. He will be followed by Pat Reed, Senior Vice President for Public Policy and Government Affairs at Independent Sector. Then we'll hear from Sandra Swirsky, partner at Urban Swirsky and Associates, familiar to us all from her work with the Philanthropy Roundtable and the Alliance for Charitable Reform. And finally, we'll hear from Gary Bass, founder and executive director of OMB Watch, who's about to cross over to the dark side as he assumes the role of president at the Bauman Foundation here in Washington. We're going to have to let Dean Zerbe go immediately after he makes his presentation today, so he can't stay for the entire panel. In a phrase that will bring joy to some hearts and strike terror in others, Mr. Zerbe will be on his way to the Hill to render his much sought advice and counsel there. Dean.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Bill, very much. Thanks very much for putting this together, and I appreciate it. I apologize. I'm going to take a bit of your time and go through fairly quickly a presentation that's meant for a longer version, but I'll try to talk pretty fast to make up for that. Just as kind of background on myself, Bill is kind of a senior counsel and tax counsel for the committee. The reason I kind of mention this is that I think folks kind of focus on me as I know from your role, the charities, but actually charities was a small part of my journey. I was basically tax counsel, one of 4 tax counsels on the committee, and worked on all the major tax legislation that moved in the last 7 years. I left the committee a couple years ago, now with the Alliant Group, which was the leading provider of tax services to small and medium businesses across the country. I've also had the pleasure of working now on a couple of charitable boards. I'm members of a few national charities, and I must admit it's been very eye-opening for me, a great learning experience to see from the charities' perspective what their view is and what their take is. Quite frankly, I've learned that a lot of what we do here in Washington is very beneficial. I think charities do and intend to, the vast majority want to do good work, seek to do good work, and quite frankly, things like the new Form 990s, the discussions on governance, and yes, even Senator Grassley's oversight has actually been extremely helpful for folks who want to do the right thing at their charities. It gives them the tent pole to hold on to against folks who raise questions or what have you. I'm going to kind of take you through 3 points here. What won't happen, what will continue to happen, and what could happen, focusing on universities, hospitals, and competition regarding small businesses, UBIT. In terms of what won't happen, that's pretty simple. You're not going to see a change in the foundation excise tax. that's going to be punishing foundations who increase a higher payout to charities. This idea of the 1.25% that's been kicking around, I don't really see it happening. It hasn't happened for a number of years. I think what you could get if the foundations wanted it is a tax that would actually reward those foundations, particularly family foundations, smaller foundations that do give strong payout, that you could actually have a tiered system that would encourage those and reward those entities that do that. That, I think, is a possibility. I think the others that are being proposed prior just continue to be talked. The idea of creating government panels and commissions to meet, discuss the problems that charities are seeing regarding government funding that's been kicked around has been trumpeted. I don't see that happening. What I would suggest, and it's very nice to be joined by Pat Reed, is for charities that are interested in this and view this as a strong concern, I would suggest you look back at what the Finance Committee did, setting up the nonprofit panel with the independent sector, showing the lead on that, and coming to Congress with the proposals and recommendations. I don't think you need yet another government commission or another group of secretaries meeting together to talk about these problems and giving recommendations. Just come forward with the recommendations. If they're substantive and have merit, I think Congress will view them in an open light. Requirements on charity foundation board composition. I think this has been put forward out in California merely to give folks on my side of the world something to jump up and down about. I don't see this happening at all. It will not happen. Certainly will not happen in this Congress. It wasn't going to happen in the prior Congress, but it makes for good fundraising letters. Low profit limited liability companies, this is not going to happen. I would say at this time, the last thing we need is more low profit companies. Maybe high profits would be kind of nice. But just in general, this is something that the tax code folks are not at all keen on. Yes, again, it's something that makes some folks happy to keep talking about. But again, the cut and chase won't happen. 501c4 reform, I know it's gotten a lot of discussion in the elections. Not going to happen. I don't see anything taking place in this area. I expect that this has been a known, by the way, just as a side, the movement of 529s to 501c4s and using them as a vehicle for political work has been known for, a couple, 3 years, has been aware of. Folks have not seemed to be concerned about it. Then with United Citizens, suddenly everyone got seized with it. Setting aside the merits of it, I don't see anything happening on this. The idea of creating an SBA for the IRS, first of all, I'd say representing small, medium businesses, I don't know really why you would want to embrace that idea. It's not been a whirlwind of joy for small businesses to have the SBA. But setting this aside, you're not going to get it. The tax writing committees are not going to allow for a division between the tax committees in terms of the tax code. So you're not going to see that's not going to happen as well. I've always kind of thought that the nonprofit, where AmeriCorps is housed, the National Center for I've just forgotten the name of it, but there's the place you might want to look for being the lead for charitable work in the government. Also, I know that there's been some interest in bringing back the car donation, or as I like to think of it, allowing people to donate their Yugo, claim it's an antique, and claim a $10,000 deduction, even though the charity only gets about $5. That won't happen either. It's all due to scoring. But again, these are things that lobbyists like to talk about and keep people busy and active. What will continue to happen, happily, we'll continue to allow orphans to be stolen, have their money stolen to pay for golf courses. We'll continue to have charities paying for club officials to go to the Harvard Club. Museums will continue to provide tax-free luxury housing. These are just things, by the way, I keep various scraps of paper. This is just from what I had kind of at the bottom of my briefcase. It's just a random sample. If you like, I can get you 40 more tomorrow if you'd like. This is one of my favorite. Small colleges will continue to pay their presidents over $2 million in salary, as well as all the family members. That's good times. So all those will continue on. Fear not. Corporations will be banned for using offshore entities to reduce taxes. Charities will do the same thing and be applauded. Actually, it was interesting. A Democrat on the House side actually proposed eliminating the burden for the charities in this regard so that they wouldn't even be hurt by this. Imagine if we had said, well, the problem with corporations going offshore and avoiding taxes, we hate that. What we'll do? We'll just make it easy and avoid that tax. So anyways, that was good times. This is actually one of the most important ones, all kidding aside, is this article that was in the Washington Post about the use of tax-exempt bonds. I'm going to talk a bit about the costs of tax-exempt bonds and the burden it places. This is a good example of it in more kind of detail. You just don't get this. Credit to David Hilsenrath for doing an excellent job on this. But lastly, what you'll do is you'll continue to see these will all remain legal. I can assure you that, God forbid, we should do anything to prevent orphanages from not having their money. They'll continue on. What I do worry about, though, is that you'll continue to also have lawyers who think that the greatest defense for their client is to say, well, this is legal. This is legal. This is all perfectly fine, as they show up with their clients on the front page of the Washington Post trying to justify chandeliers being cleaned or whatever. So just keep that in mind whenever you're with a charity and the lawyers are saying it's legal. you should start heading for the exits because it's going to be a bad moon rising in terms of what's going on. The thing to kind of remember about all this is that taxpayers subsidize everything I just mentioned. This is what's constantly forgotten. We always kind of think of these things going on as a victimless crime, that it's a zero sum, that nothing matters. No, you all get to pay for that. You all subsidize this. Everything that's there I just mentioned, you all are paying for with your state, federal, local property taxes, your federal income taxes. We're all paying for this. We're all paying for that, and that makes you happy and warm in bed at night. Hallelujah. But the thing to remember, of course, is in case you've forgotten and you want to question me later, remember your three excuses. Cap. Cops. This is really an enforcement issue, despite the fact that the law is unenforceable, but this is really about enforcement. Apples, you're really just talking about a few bad apples. No, it's an orchard of bad apples, but that's okay. Remember, it's always a few bad apples. And puppies. We love puppies. Charities are good people. Therefore, we shouldn't have to criticize them and everything like that. It's kind of the concept that the Nature Conservancy had. One of my favorite moments of the Nature Conservancy investigation is that the Nature Conservancy actually had a sawmill, cut down trees. And I guess the thinking was if you hug a tree before you cut it down, that someone makes you a better, that makes the tree happier knowing that you were wearing Birkenstock when you cut it down. So anyways, that's all good stuff. So just to remind you of the rationales on all that. Here's what could happen, and this is what I kind of want to spend a little bit of time, and I appreciate your patience and my fellow panelists' patience on all this, is charities acting charitable. This is basically all the rest of this discussion's about, and what I would suggest could happen is this bold concept that charities could act charitable, meaning that your mother and your grandmother would actually nod their head and say, yes, that sounds exactly why we sent our $25. That's what we intended. This is not a new concept. We actually did quite a bit of this in the rules regarding credit counseling. If you go back and look at that in 501Q, there's an enormous amount of discussion about credit counseling in that area. In terms of requiring them to act like a charity, basically credit counseling was used as a vehicle to gouge the poor. And we started to say, well, maybe they should actually act like a charity and provide free or discounted service to the poor. I know, crazy talk, but that's what we did and that's what we put in, and the world keeps turning. 501R in the healthcare bill, which I'll spend a little bit about, is the same concept. It's the beginnings of the same idea that we provide massive tax breaks to hospitals. Maybe they could actually provide some benefit to the poor. That's been in there. Universities we'll talk about, and UBIT we'll talk about as well, too. Let's talk about healthcare. Repeal and replace. That's the siren song that we're hearing. I would say I speak all over the country constantly. I would say to you, I'll give you a big hanky later if that makes you feel happier, but people are profoundly unhappy with this health bill. Regardless of where I'm speaking, be it Massachusetts, Wisconsin, California, Alabama, they're not happy. So repeal and replace may not happen this Congress, may partially happen this Congress, may happen with the next Congress, new administration. Let's talk about an example of that. Hospitals. Just give you a few of those quotes there. I wanted to note, by the way, these are ways and means. I know, my old boss, Senator Grassley, gets a lot of credit or love or unlove in terms of his work. This actually came from Bill Thomas, a very, very capable chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. We followed on his work in terms of this, and a lot of his good hearings that you're seeing put up there. This is the bottom line on what those quotes are all about. There's no discernible difference between a for-profit and a nonprofit hospital. Yes, do some nonprofit hospitals do great work? Absolutely. There's some fantastic, particularly inner-city Catholic hospitals, do glorious work helping the poor. They're great. But to be honest, a lot of for-profits do good work, and a lot of nonprofit hospitals, as you can see with the quotes there, including the commissioner of the IRS, there's no discernible difference. Think that through. Think about that in terms of what we're talking about. We're giving them $20 billion a year in tax breaks, federal, state, and local, $20 billion in tax breaks, and there's no discernible difference between a for-profit and a nonprofit? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I'm giving you $20 billion and I don't have a difference between what you're providing and what the for-profit's providing? You got to be nuts. You want to know why our economy is where it is? Come on, you cannot be giving out $20 billion. Again, this is our money. People have a problem, and I would say it's mostly on the right, that somehow a tax expenditure, if I give you a tax expenditure, a tax break, well, let's just throw money out of an airplane. Oh, yeah, good luck. Call, right? Let us know if you get work. If this was a spending program, we'd be all over it. Where's the midnight basketball? What's going on? Why aren't we getting in this? What are we getting for the bang for the buck in terms of these proposals? So you've got that in terms of what's going on. Think of it in terms of what else you could provide for that. And to the Finance Committee, asking this question about the bang for the buck. This was a bipartisan provision that was put in there. Senator Grassley got a lot of the attention of it and certainly did a lot of the spade work. This is something that both committee members saw, Baucus and Grassley, and you put in 501R. It doesn't change the world. It doesn't change everything upside down, but it's a tremendously good start. Very good work. No longer, this is crazy, you can no longer overcharge low-income folks for medical services. One of my happiest moments is that when you come in as a poor person that's uninsured, you don't get the Blue Cross rate, you get the rack rate. You get the top rate. You get the highest rate that they've got That's the rate you get to pay. That's your reward for being a poor uninsured person coming to the hospital. Billing and collection. You can read this article in Baltimore Sun. It'll bring tears to your eyes in terms of the hammer and drag and strum that went through the poor in terms of the collection efforts by the hospitals. Why is that in most cases? That's right. They're not going to get any money from you from your poor, but they're going to make certain that you never come back to that hospital. They're going to make sure that you tell all your friends, do not come back to that hospital. They made my life miserable. Must have a charity care policy plan. This is, I credit the committee. They did yeoman's work on this. This is probably where it's thin. It just requires that you have a policy for charity care. It doesn't tell you what that has to be. So your charity care policy could be, we like to get them cab fare to the county hospital. That's our charity care policy, and away we go. And that could be beefed up, but it's at least got it in there and in place. The other thing is that they have to publicize it. Quite frankly, a lot of these things have been under a bushel. Article there from Transparency, and the Access Project, a very part of Community Catalyst about that. And finally, a community health needs assessment, incorporating the hospital with county health providers, state health providers in terms of what they're doing, how they're pulling the oars. This isn't all about emergency room. This is about providing inoculations, providing outreach, providing preventative care, all that to assist them in terms of what they're doing. Let me note, by the way, when this came out, and Grassley, God forbid, actually put out a press release in the healthcare bill praising this is one of the few bipartisan things. Folks from all over the stream, but particularly those who woke up every day with hosannas about the healthcare bill, blasted Grassley for this. I think they blasted because they were absolutely deeply embarrassed that the most effective program to help the poor today was a program that Senator Grassley initiated and had everybody thinking, well, no, wait a minute, we did all this and it didn't actually cost us a dime. It just took the money that we were already providing and actually said, why don't we do something for it? I think that was deeply embarrassing for a lot of folks out there in terms of this issue, in terms of what was going on. The thing to understand for a poor person going into a hospital now, this is what helps them now. Today, this is the thing that helps them. All the other happy clappy stuff that's out there, most of that is all until 2013, 2014. Poor person needing help right now, this is what's going to help them. This is what's going to assist them in terms of what's going on. So you've got that. But much more could be done. For those who are coming in, the new members, as Bill, you well mentioned, all the new members looking at trying to control costs, control spending. You can see all this. You can provide much more. You could require charity care. You could require additional work. You could require the hospitals to provide care commensurate with their tax benefits. You could do all that as a means of helping. Is it going to be a cure-all? Is it going to accomplish everything? No, I'm not here to tell you that, but it will certainly move the ball and advance the ball enormously in terms of where things are going. I would also say for those who are interested, we've got a lot of new officials at the state level, at the local level, governors. This is a huge issue for them. When you go to a state, I guarantee when you go to a local folks, the biggest folks who are off the county rolls in terms of property tax are your hospitals. They're the ones that are off the rolls. They're not paying any tax. They need to be looking into that. For those who are interested in these issues from a state and local level, this is just as important. Quite frankly, the states have been better on this issue than the feds in a great deal. So you've got that. Also, I would encourage you not to forget the tax-exempt insurance companies. I don't discuss that. But again, for those who are looking for policy matters of what are we doing, tax-exempt folks there as well, too. And again, this is not crazy. We did this in pre-69. What happened is we used to require hospitals to provide charity care. This was not revolution. In 69, we passed Medicare and Medicaid, and the very brilliant folks there said, oh, well, cripes, we'll never need to worry about poor people again because we got Medicare and Medicaid. And so away we went and we pulled the reg. So this is basically going back to the future in terms of where you are in terms of it. So you've got T versus T, your tax-exempt executives versus the Tea Party folks coming in terms of their priorities. In terms of, are you going to look at controlling spending? Are you going to look at trying to keep things within bound in terms of taxes? If you don't look at what you're already spending money on through tax expenditures and say, what are we getting for that? What are we accomplishing? What are we realizing for that? I think you're in a very bad way. And nothing of that is more true than in tuition. Tuition skyrocketing and university support. You all know it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. You're all very familiar with these numbers that tuition is going very up. Lynn Munson, who's here today, I think did the best for a simple mind like me to understand, which is milk would now be $15 if you follow the universities in terms of their inflation. We all know it's going up. I know for the universities, they love to talk about net tuition. All this net tuition is going up as well, too, in terms of what's going on. As the College Board just mentioned, of course, what's going on is net tuition is going up, and what a shock, we're having expenditures going up with it. So we're having spending going up, and we're having federal tax expenditures, which, again, remind you, you all pay for it. It's not free money. You all pay for it. Go through it. I just put up, and let me put a big asterisk and caveat on this. I actually do have a day job, and it doesn't involve putting these slides together. These are general estimates from joint tax. Some of these numbers may be a bit off or a little bit there, but I think you get the general ballpark of what I'm talking about. These are the range of the tax breaks that you get as an institution. We focus way too often on the tax breaks that you get to the individual trying to pay in their family. or the spending they give. We completely ignore the massive tax breaks that go to these institutions as well, too, as institutions, and asking them what are they doing for those. My favorite, I'll just highlight, is, little of you know this, but a university gets a tax break that no one else gets out here, is that if I provide a university employee tuition at the school, little Jimmy gets to go to the school, that is tax-free. No one gets that. If I'm Walmart and I employ somebody and say, hey, you're going to go to University of Virginia and we'd like to pay for that, that is a taxable salary item. But not if you're a university employer. They're the only ones that get it. So what you've got is a situation where university employees get tuition free and they don't even have to pay tax on it. Wake up and wonder, I wonder if these guys really wake up that much motivated about trying to control tuition when they don't even have to pay tax on those provisions. So that gives you a sense of the tax benefits that are provided. $18 billion a year on endowments and loan. I'd let you notice that as well, too. But it gives you a sense of the amount of dollars we're talking about. This is, I think, the conundrum and the difficulty you've got out there is that if you don't control tuition, you are not going to control government spending, and taxes will increase. You're going to have those benefits there. If you don't do it, and this is, I just kind of pulled these by random. This is over the years, various quotes of folks highlighting, as you can see, all the way back to 76, and then you've got Secretary Bennett and other folks all quoting and making the same point about what a shock. Raise government support, tuition increases. It's a constant cycle. You're going to see it and see it and see it. And for the new Congress, if they want to get their handle on this, you can just keep repeating this, and we could be greased soon enough in terms of saying, well, yes, we'll raise tuition $20 billion, but we'll match that with more spending, and away we'll go. And I would note to you the difficulty on this is, while we've been able to keep the heads above water for the lower income families and poor families, for the middle class it's not the case at all. They are getting grinded. They make too much money, and too much money is the great amount of $150K, basically the salary of a cop in New York City, $150K. They make too much money for all the down for the programs for the poor, but they certainly don't feel comfortable writing that $50,000 check. It's extremely difficult for them to do it. They're getting crushed by this. I hear this constantly out there, and we need to be mindful of it. And to say, well, the answer is let's just expand these programs, you're just going to be asking for more tuition increases out there. So you've got to deal with that. There's a great article, by the way, in the Wall Street Journal that I had clipped out from a guy who actually was on the inside talking about how they make these decisions and what they do in terms of these tuition costs and what have you. It's not what we all think of, well, let's add up the money, let's add up our tuition, let's see what we get, and away they go. No, it's much more detailed and considered than that in terms of what's going on. Can Congress cut spending? There's a terrific study by the Delta Cost Project. Absolutely, they can cut spending. There's no question about it. There's other very good work out there about the ways that folks can be cutting spending. It just stands reason. I deal with businesses every day. Businesses have to deal with these issues. Cutting costs is in their bread and in their butter. It's what they're having to do. Clearly, there's room for them to be looking at cutting costs. But the question is exhortation enough? Can we just say, hoo-ah, you've got to cut costs. We really want you to do it. By God, this time we really mean it. So can colleges cut spending on their own? Yeah, sure. And we'll be cutting off, free beer, and they'll stop drinking. Yeah, that's the reality you've got here. You're asking folks who are running these institutions that are getting money hand over fist poured over on them to somehow show enormous restraint in terms of it. I love the headline from the Wall Street Journal: tuition costs and Pell Grants rise in tandem. Yes, what a shock there that they managed to do that. This was my favorite thing after Lynn Munson, who's here, testified before the committee. The universities from DuPont 1 sent us this letter in terms of how they were going to control costs. This was in 2007. We're going to control costs. This is how we're going to do it. Very serious letter. My favorite moment for whoever here is from Cato is a shout out to you, because they actually cite regulation. Federal, state, and local regulation is the reason that costs are going up. I had no idea. I'm sending my membership cards to Cato 2, DuPont 1, so they can all join together. But to me, it just shows a farcical viewpoint of any candle in the storm that they can hold on to in terms of justifying costs. Businesses have to face this constantly and deal with costs. But of course, you see the bottom line there is, yes, after this plea that, yes, they were going to resort to keeping costs down, we've, of course, seen costs continue to go up as they've always gone before. And again, just to note, though, that for lower income folks, thanks to government spending, there's not been the hit there on it, and that's good news. Obviously, we're pleased to have that on that, but just in terms of the bigger picture. Endowments, in terms of the university endowments, just to give you this, $340 billion, this is an old number. I was talking to folks who I think know better. This is basically where they were in 06. They've had a dip down, and I think the thought is this is roughly right. They're basically back where they were. They just had 12.6% increase in it. Their payout is 4.3%. I think that number is suspect. I would leave it to my panelist, Ms. Swirsky, who knows these issues better than I do. But the way private foundations do pay out is measured very precisely. I find that the universities tend to have a somewhat looser, I don't mean that as a hard comment, but a different view, not the same as what you would apply to a foundation. Sometimes it's a rolling 3-year average. It's other issues that they do. There are no payout requirements on them, and there's this is one of the favorite lines you get, and when we looked at endowments, this turned to be absolutely inaccurate, that, oh, well, all the money's locked up, all the money's in storage, all the money's put aside. That's nonsense. Usually what it is the university itself has decided to put it in under lock and key, but invariably when you actually look at it, the vast majority of it is just, I'd like to help study French poetry. Great. Guess what? Could you give scholarships for French poetry? You betcha. So it's a canard that's out there from it. But what you basically get is a life cycle on the theories of endowments. You can't pay now because you need to save. You need to be a rainy day fund. Then when we have a bad time, downturn of economics, well, of course, the endowment's also down that time. Well, now you can't spend because the endowment's down. That wouldn't be a good idea. So we need to get it back into value. Now, 3, when the endowment recovers, then you need to go back to step 1 again. So it's always a good story, and it always happens that you never have to pay out. So it works out well. Just to give you a sense of the power of these endowments, and yes, you can point out, I very much recognize that the big boys have got the big endowments, but let me tell you, there's a huge Chivas Regal effect. For these universities to start sending massive signals of where they are in terms of spending. If Harvard was free, the signal would be enormous towards the rest of this country. You would see everybody, right now, all these other universities can get away with their spending and say, well, we're like Harvard one step below, so we're $58,000 or $48,000, Harvard's at 50. So you start saying it's zero. It would be an enormous signal to the poor in this country that it's possible. Yes, I know they provide it, but the signaling out there is the cost and the dollars. But you could look at that in terms of accomplishing it. Again, you can see some other numbers there. The middle quote is, I think, one of the most fascinating ones. And again, I want to kind of explode a myth. This is from Judge Cabranes, a very, very respected appellate judge, who's on the Yale board. This is a terrific article to read, and I just take one quote out of there. Disabuse yourself with the view that somehow university board members are going to be waking up thinking and understanding and engaged on these issues. That's not going to happen. It's just a simple reality of it. The idea we're going to exhort them and say, by God, let's cut costs this time, will not happen. Wonderful article from the judge on that. And again, you can see from Gravel, the general comments. What you see when you look at the literature, by the way, and I don't mean this is casting bad, because, of course, it's not that university professors that's doing it, or president, is that there's a direct correlation between the size of endowments and the salaries of university presidents as well, too, and some other factors that kick in out there. I just want to mention, just as I'm going to go through very quickly, this is a very sad story. This has been something that's been discussed in the education community quite a bit. There's a student, family bleeding in education, went nearly $100,000 in debt. College enrolled the student without any questions whether they could afford tuition. College introduced the student to lenders. They underwrote the loans. College contends no role to determine whether students can afford loans. They wash their hands of that. Story continues. You aid administrators, they're not going to want to get involved. They want to keep their jobs. And then we get the typical outrage Senate hearings. Love Senate hearings. That's always great fun. So we do that. And then we get the administration putting forward regulations that focus on for-profit colleges and largely ignore tax-exempt colleges and universities. No requirements, no recognition of, well, now, wait a minute. These boys actually do a crazy thing. They pay tax. Maybe we could ask even more of these folks who get these massive tax breaks. I know, it's a crazy thought. No, don't do that. So we do that. There was only one problem with this story, by the way. Oh, that's right. She's a New York University graduate. There's a New York University graduate that got all the attention and started this whole discussion. My alma mater. I'm the only person who actually has got a double major from NYU, both in film production and in LLM and tax. And they love me dearly for that. So this is all at NYU. They did that. Well, now, we didn't do anything regarding NYU. That would be wrong. We don't want to go after NYU. We now propose regulations that effective that tax institutions, they'll be at a disadvantage to education institutions that are tax exempt. We're actually putting them at an unequal level playing field. So no requirements for tax-exempt universities, money for nothing. Now, I have no idea why that would be the case. That doesn't make any sense. I don't understand why that would be and why that would be happening. But you might want to remember, as we discuss these things, where money's come from and what animates folks, as we hear about so often in Washington. It might be useful to bear that in mind. I would suggest what we need to do is create a new relationship between the government and nonprofit colleges and universities. We need to end this cycle of more tax expenditures and more taxpayer spending coupled with no accountability on the side of universities. We cannot continue with no more money for nothing. We cannot do that. We are going to bankrupt the country. I think the priority has obviously got to be controlling tuition increases. I think you should be looking at payouts. This is very much a given for the larger endowments. And I welcome your ideas on how to accomplish this. But what I liken it to is almost as if the Department of Defense decided to tell Boeing, I'll tell you what, could you build us a plane and just send us whatever the bill is and we'll pay it. It is effectively what we are doing as a government with universities and colleges, is basically requiring nothing for them in terms of everything that we are providing, and we are ending up in the position that we are in now. We will continue in that pace, and for the folks that are coming into Congress, I think both Republicans and Democrats, I would say, by the way, in the endowment issue, one of the best and smartest folks on this was a Democrat from Vermont, Peter Welch, is that I think these issues animate both sides of the aisle, and there can be great common ground in terms of trying to deal with these, but you've got to look at the reality of these institutions. Just to exhort them to do better and to reduce costs isn't going to happen. I've taken enough of your time. I don't want to spend too much time on you, but I would just note for those who are interested in this issue that the IRS's midterm report on colleges and universities and discussion about UBIT is very important and very well worth reading. What you've got effectively is for-profit organizations, small, medium businesses that I work with on a daily basis are at an incredible disadvantage with nonprofit entities that run their own businesses on the side. Quite frankly, it is a cost-shifting, 42 cost-shifting analysis, where just like I can have offshore companies, a big multinational, I can shift my costs to the Netherlands, Antilles, to China, wherever to reduce my costs. What a shock. I can take a charity, I can move my costs from the charity over to the for-profit and wipe out any costs. I think it's something that you need to look at the tax base and what's going on. I think it's something Congress is going to look at in terms of what's going on. So just to end up here, and I appreciate all your patience, at the end of the day, this is all this is about, is charities acting charitable. That's all this is really about, is saying, could we ask charities to actually show and justify the tax benefits providing? I think the benefits of this are you can control government spending, you can continue to keep taxes low, you can improve education. One of the points I forgot to mention is in the Delta report, and I kind of passed over, as they noted, this continuing spiraling inflation in education is basically undercutting enormously the ability for many Americans to afford education or keep education. So it has a great negative impact in that regard. So we can improve education, we can help the poor. Obviously, we want to help the poor in terms of health, we want to help the poor in terms of education. They're the natural object of charity. In some ways, it's getting the charities to refocus their attention to the poor as the beneficiary of their work. You can help the middle class, obviously, enormously with tuition and supporting small business in terms of, I think, looking at the UBIT issues. And I leave you with this last note. My favorite political person is Margaret Thatcher, probably not a surprise, in part because she was a tax attorney and a Methodist, which I am as well, a nice combination. She did not go to NYU, but I believe if she knew, she would be a big Nebraska football fan. But her favorite show was Yes Minister, and this is one of the quotes from Yes Minister, if you've ever seen it. This is basically about civil servants in in the UK, trying to keep the minister from accomplishing whatever crazy idea he's got, and this is the suggested list of how you do it. So for those who are interested in these issues and interested in engaging them, as I talk to the new members and the new policymakers in Washington, I remind them this is your ready-made excuse list in terms of what's going on. And I thank you, and I appreciate enormously your time and your patience, and my panelists, and thank you all very much. Sure, yes, I will, but I feel rude for everyone else. But yes,
Okay. Just questions very quickly before he takes off for the Hill. Yes, please. Yes. Yeah, sure.
I appreciate the sardonic wit, and I think you did touch on some very important aspects of what the view in terms of not-for-profit hospitals. Do you think that happens in D.C. specifically? We have so many great Howard University hospitals.
I think that's a terrific question. What I would suggest, and I think it's a great thing for the reporters to look at and other folks, and I think a great thing is to look at, the Access Project and Community Catalyst. They go, you might talk to them, they go to hospitals, they go and see what they're doing. Now, I went to GW because I had a friend going there, and, I just kind of looked around, and it seemed okay. It wasn't kind of readily apparent what their charity care policy is. But I would talk to those two institutions. They may have looked at those places and may know firsthand what the deal is. But they could also tell you, well, here's how I would test it, or here's the questions I would ask, or here's what I think you'd want to proceed. So I think it's a great way to do it. I think it's so much local communities looking at their own local universities, their own local hospitals, I think is vitally important in understanding. So I think there's a path there that you could do it, talk to them. They can give you kind of the roadmap on it. I don't know of anything, to be honest, immediately or firsthand in terms of that. I do believe that the Baltimore Sun series that I did certainly did not cast a good light on several Baltimore nonprofit hospitals, but it didn't touch on that. But I don't know of anything readily. I'm not aware of any reporting, but I do think that you could yourself, test it, or, working with an organization, see, well, where are we on this? What are they doing? And it may be just opening up a dialogue and discussion with them of saying, what more can you be doing? What can you be discussing and casting a light on it? The new Form 990, Schedule H, does a lot in that regard as well, too. So I think there's certainly opportunities abound, but I don't have anything kind of a known problem with those organizations. I would say the general rule has been that most hospitals do very little to nothing. I mean, that's typically what you would find and expect in terms of what's going on. And thank you for your kind comments about it. I would say there's normally videos in this, but that was going to be too much to do lots of Gomer saying surprise, surprise, and I have Amy Winehouse quoted and things like that. So that's right. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that'll be on the YouTube version. Absolutely. Yes, sir. Did you have a yes,
one
sir.
more question. Please, yes. Oh, sorry. You need to wait for the microphone.
Thanks. You mentioned that you don't see anything happening with regulating C4s. I was wondering if you could give us your personal opinion of if you think anything should be done with C4s or how you see them moving forward.
Yeah, it is a good question, and I be honest, I probably need to give it, some more thought. Like I said, this is actually, it's because of my great respect for Bill that I came here and kind of dusted off notes and policymakers have been asking me, and I thought a bit about it. I would say several points. One, I don't know why the administration, if it is focused on this, would not look at regulatory changes to this itself. If you look at the statutory language of C4, seems very tight in terms of you shall, and this is very typical in the charitable field in general. I would say it's rare that the statute is the problem. It's in the regs, the guidance, the interpretation down the road. The C4 language is very tight. You could, I'm happy to send the, OMB watch. I'm happy to send the administration an APA handbook if they need one to write rules and guides. I think they could do something if they wanted to. I don't think they will, though, because I think the simple truth is that side of the aisle will find this to their benefit as well. They're already using it. It's just a question of the aisle. I think we raised the point in the staff discussion draft going back, though, of having more transparency and openness in terms of donors and having that out there. I guess in my mind, I'd like to find the proper vehicles for everything. Having a C4, I don't know if this is what folks woke up thinking, and this is the proper vehicle for a tax. If this is what we want to be doing in terms of tax exempt, it doesn't sound right or feel right. Going to my personal view on it, and I certainly, kind of view openness and transparency as something that we looked at and viewed as a good thing for charities. I don't think you need to have every single donor, but I think, for instance, having all donors, and I think, Pat, the nonprofit panel recommended this too, if I remember, everything over $25,000 that's a corporate should be made public. Am I saying that right?
That didn't actually come from the panel.
Oh,
but
okay, I'm
it's
sorry.
something we've
That was a
looked
good idea, though. But, yeah, I mean, I'm kind of not giving you, I think, a good, hard answer, and I apologize, but I think, yes, I think it's looking at the C4, what's accomplishing. I think kind of like Dorothy, though, the administration has all the power itself to go home. It has all the power itself to change what's going on in C4s. I do not think it's going to use it, though. I think it's been a nice tom-tom to beat on for the elections, but I think it'll just be, okay, well, now we'll use that as a vehicle ourselves. I do get uncomfortable, though. I don't think that we intended C4s to be used in this manner, but I don't see the committees taking a look at it. And I would, this is kind of why I prefaced it by saying the 529 migration of C4s was happening previously. No one cared about it back then. I mean, this has been kind of a known, setting aside what I think in kind of a clean tax, geek view of the world. I just don't see, there's certainly plenty of other problems in the code as well, too, that maybe kind of rise before this. But, yeah, I think having a revisit of what you're accomplishing with C4, just like, as you can tell, part of what I'm trying to say is, should we be revisiting what we are doing on C3s and what's happened over time there, where those have been kind of changed over time. But anyways, it's a very good question, and I haven't given it, the thought that it deserves. I thought more just briskly as a Hill staffer, former Hill staffer, is anything going to happen, yes or no? No, is my good sense.
Thanks.
Sure, thank you.
I think I'd just as soon do it from here. I want to breathe deeply. I want to thank my wonderful friend Dean
There he
Zerby
goes
for
again.
again challenging
Off to the hill.
and sharing with you a little bit of the mood in Washington right now. I mean, several key things he talked about: the focus on money, the focus on investigations, the focus on taxes, the focus on tough choices, the focus on high intensity. Clearly, we've come out of a period of massive change. As Bill noted at the beginning, we've got a huge number of new members of Congress coming. We have a huge education job ahead of us in the next week. And in fact, the jockeying has already started over who's going to be in leadership positions, what the committees are going to be looking like. There will be lots of staff changes, so a lot for us to pay attention to. Certainly, the overall mood that we picked up from the elections is that economy and jobs are number one. It's a big question to me and to all of us, I think, whether nonprofits will be viewed as critical to the economy, as an engine for job creation, and what role are we going to play in that whole debate. We've also heard a lot about the need to cut spending, cut the deficit, and very few specifics as of yet. Incoming Majority Leader Eric Cantor has already said that he expects the first bill that the House will be looking at will cut $100 billion out of discretionary spending, but little specifics yet about where that's going to come. Now, there's talk about how it's going to be essential. Compromise is going to be the name of the game. We've got to have compromise to get anything done. I think that there is still a huge question on the table, and some of what Dean shared is symptomatic of that. But whether the president and the Democrats, as well as congressional Republicans, will determine that they're better served by seeking compromise or continuing to vilify the other side leading up to 2012, when control of the Senate and the White House will be at stake. The mood of the country seems to be very interesting, and I cite my boss, Diana Aviv, in a speech that she gave at the Independent Sector Conference, cited a study that I think really characterizes some of what we learned in the elections. And this was a study done by Kaiser Family Foundation, Harvard University, and the Washington Post, where they found that Americans who call for more limited government also want government to provide Social Security and Medicare. Probably more surprising in that study is that those same Americans have a strong desire to have government help improve schools and reduce poverty. So we've got this real challenge between people that want limited government, but also want government to do a lot more. And that really goes, to some extent, shows you the divides and the similarities on either side of the ideological spectrum. Now, there's some big things that should be happening in the next 2 months. Congress will be returning next Monday, for their lame duck session. If they don't take action, then every one of us is going to see our taxes, our paychecks be a little bit lower in January. All of our taxes are going up. We know that the IRS has already told a lot of employers that they need to start making changes to their payroll systems right away to accommodate the tax changes. Congress needs to decide what they're going to do about the tax cuts. I heard interesting discussion. Is it tax cuts or is it continuation of the current tax system? Again, we get into ideological war of words, but there's some big things. The current credits for child care and adoption will expire at the end of this year. The marriage penalty, which used to be a big thing we talked about, how you were going to time your wedding ceremony because it was cheaper to pay taxes often if you were still single than if you got married. We're looking at the estate tax coming back at levels that we haven't seen for 8 or 9 years, and levels that are likely to get an awful lot of people up in arms saying this is not fair. Just a single home in Washington, D.C. could put you well over the limit now. This whole debate is likely to consume a great amount of the time over the next few weeks. The most likely scenario right now, the pundits are saying, is that we're going to see a 1 or 2 year extension of the current tax system for everyone, and that politicians have a tendency to want to push the hardballs back to the next Congress. They could also push the spending ball back to the next Congress. Right now, government's only funded until December 3rd, when the current continuing resolution expires, and they've got to figure out, are they going to continue at the current 2010 rates? Are they going to try to enact some cuts? Or once more, they're going to just pass another continuing resolution and let the folks next year decide. For nonprofits, we've also been looking, and a lot of folks care about some of the tax provisions that expired at the end of 2009. A provision that allows folks who are over 70 and a half and have to start taking money out of their IRA accounts to allow them to give that tax-free, not counted as taxable income, but give it tax-free directly to charities. There are incentives that actually a number of businesses have been using all year, with the high expectation that this provision will be reinstated to give an enhanced deduction for food contributions or contributions of food inventory. All of those right now have not been reenacted, and a lot of folks are saying that there will be a push to get this done and possibly even extend all the provisions for 2010 and 2011. So what's likely to happen next year? Clearly, taxes will continue to be a big focus. We want to look carefully at what the president's bipartisan fiscal commission puts out in early December. They've decided to put off all of their public meetings and have been meeting in private for most of this month. So we don't really have much of an indicator about what they're likely to say in terms of both entitlement programs or mandatory programs like Social Security and Medicare, as well as the tax system. I think Dean gave you some indication that nonprofits are also likely to find it's already happening at the state level. It's been happening over the last several years at the federal level, but the definitions about who and what should be exempt from taxation, who and what should be eligible to receive tax-deductible contributions, is going to be under scrutiny. Now, the Senate Finance Committee Majority Leader Russ Sullivan told us in September that he fully expects, and they will continue to be in the majority next year, but he fully expects that they are going to be looking at the qualifications for tax-exempt status, particularly in light of some of the changes that came in with healthcare reforms. How much can nonprofits engage in profit-making commercial activities? You heard a lot from Dean about that. What will the new health insurance exchanges that states are required to create look like? I mean, that's certainly testing the lines between what is appropriately government, what is appropriately nonprofit, what is appropriately for-profit business. And I think you also had some indication that Congress is likely to be looking at how tax incentives work. They've already started doing that with the provisions that expired last year. Who benefits and what should benefit? Now, certainly Dean mentioned healthcare. Both sides of the aisle have said that fixes are necessary. Again, not many specifics offered, but this is something that we are going to have to be paying close attention to over the course of the next few years. There's a lot more, and I want to comment just on the final question about election spending and Citizens United. This was certainly the most expensive midterm election in history, especially when you start counting all of the ads that were paid for by nonprofits. And for those of us who work in this sector, it was sometimes infuriating to hear on television and the radio and read in print about nonprofits, knowing full well that to the public, the 26, 27, 28 different categories of 501c organizations makes no difference at all. We're all nonprofits. And there are a lot of folks who believe that nonprofits of any kind shouldn't be used by anonymous donors to influence elections. I do believe, contrary to what Dean indicated, that there will be some kind of legislative or regulatory action. There will certainly be hearings. We know that Citizens United gave greater flexibility to corporations to engage in electioneering activities without drawing negative attention from shareholders and customers, without having their name associated with their gifts. Some of the new committee leaders in the House are still angry about Acorn, which just declared bankruptcy. But I hear constantly, well, it's just Acorn under another name. They're still continuing to operate. And so I think we're moving in a very contentious environment where we have to pay close attention. So what do nonprofits have to do? I think the central message for us has been that how critical it is to be working both sides of the aisle all the time. This was an election where there was a huge swing in one direction. In 2 more years, who knows? Voters could be angry that things didn't get fixed as quickly as they want to, and we could see another swing back. We have got to be working and have friends on both sides of the aisle. You've got to get to know your members of Congress, your new senators. Let them know what you do and what you think. The power that nonprofits have in terms of really telling the story of what we do, the people that we serve, and representing the voices of a lot of people who don't normally have a voice, and certainly individuals don't have a strong voice. And I think there were just a couple of other things that we were thinking about. Certainly, we are going to be paying close attention to the rules and restrictions that come into place both for 501c3, C4, C5, 6, 7, and how Congress is going to be paying attention to that. It's been 40 years since we last visited the rules for foundations as far as funding and support of organizations that provide advocacy, conduct advocacy, and their engagement in lobbying themselves. Almost that long since we looked at the rules for nonprofits. It's time that we take the reins into our own hands and start proposing what we'd like to see. Our voices are important, and it's going to become even more important in the next 2 years. So thank you.
Thanks. Sandra.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your patience. I'm going to talk about a couple of key takeaways from the midterm elections. I'm going to go through 10 key takeaways. When in doubt, go copy what Letterman does. So let's start with the first key takeaway, and this is going to echo something that we've heard from Pat as well as from Dean, which is this is the largest freshman class we've had in decades, over 100 brand new members, and it is going to be critically important for the nonprofit community to hit the ground running and educate their new members of Congress. As Pat said, on the economic message, most importantly, about how what you're doing is impacting jobs in your community, saving costs, giving folks worker retraining, etc. So that's the first key takeaway. Second key takeaway that I see is that we've got obviously big shifts in the House, new chairman coming in. From a nonprofit perspective, we really don't see a huge shift from Chairman Levin to Chairman Camp. Both are very interested and very enthusiastic about the nonprofit sector, perhaps because they're both from Michigan, proud, rich tradition of philanthropy and nonprofits in Michigan. Chairman Levin was very active during his chairmanship in helping to relax some of the UBIT rules. And Chairman Camp, incoming Chairman Camp, has been a very big supporter of the IRA charitable rollover provision, and he's playing an active role trying to see that is taken care of before the end of the year. So again, on purely nonprofit issues, I don't see a big change between Chairman Levin and incoming Chairman Camp. Third key takeaway, however, perhaps some rougher waters with the new incoming chair of the Ways and Means Oversight Committee. Some of you may recall that last year there was a hearing in the Oversight Subcommittee led by Congressman Bustani from Louisiana. And in some cases, he really raked over the coals some nonprofits who he felt did not provide enough support in reaction in the Gulf just after the BP oil spill. I just caution that given his interests, we may see more of that down the road. But that's the third takeaway. Moving over the Senate side, the fourth takeaway is, I mean, obviously we have a new ranking member coming in on the Senate Finance Committee. As you know, Senator Grassley had been the top Republican on the Senate Finance Committee, and because of term limits, he is going to be stepping out of that role. He will not leave the committee, but he's going to be stepping out of that role and moving over to the Judiciary Committee. In that role is very likely Senator Hatch from Utah. He brings a very different perspective to the committee. While his relationship with Senator Baucus isn't nearly as close as Senator Grassley's was, they do have a long tradition working very closely on international tax issues. So I think that there is a nice relationship there. However, I think that one of the takeaways from the election clearly is that Republicans who are going to seek re-election in 2012 are going to have to take a hard look in their rearview mirror at possible primary challenges. And I think that Senator Hatch, being from Utah, watched his dear friend Senator Bennett unseated because of a primary challenge. And so I think that while his inclination perhaps is to work closely with Senator Baucus, he's going to be very mindful of his upcoming race and what a potential challenge from a Tea Party candidate could have in his primary. So we may see him pulling a little bit more to the right, and probably a good deal less bipartisan on the committee on the whole. Fifth takeaway. We've talked a little bit about nonprofits and advocacy, and we've seen, I think we're going to hear a lot more, as Pat has suggested, about nonprofits and advocacy, whether it's the Chamber of Commerce or whether it is churches or other nonprofits engaged in advocacy meant to influence an election. I think that is clearly distinct from the advocacy that many of you do, and that calls from different groups to do more, which is advocating your positions to Congress about public policy issues that you care about. I would just caution that in the urge to rush to Congress, not on education but on advocacy, that you be mindful that members may, when you use the term advocacy, members may be thinking of a different type of advocacy. So we need to make sure that the lines aren't blurred between advocacy intended to influence an election, which we just came off the heels of, and advocacy intended to influence public policy, which is wholly appropriate for the nonprofit community. The sixth takeaway, for those of you who have been watching closely and very interested in Representative Betty McCollum's legislation on the House side, is that even though she is no longer in the majority party, I wouldn't necessarily assume that that piece of legislation is dead. Representative McCollum and her staff are very passionate about that particular bill, and I would suspect that they have already eyed a number of Republican co-leads to take over that bill and to continue pushing it in the 112th Congress. So I wouldn't necessarily think that just because she is no longer in the majority party that bill can be ignored. And I think that they're working very actively to continue the momentum that they've had in the 111th Congress and the 112th. Congressman McCollum has a bill that would do a couple of things. The first thing is the intent behind the bill is to give nonprofits more of a voice in Congress. So it would do three things. The first thing is it would set up an advisory council, about 16 members from the community, of community leaders. And that advisory council would meet regularly and advise members of Congress on issues that the nonprofit community is seeking to advance, glitches with the federal grantee process, with the federal grant-making process, everything from regulatory to a legislative action. The second thing the bill would do is it would create a mechanism for an interagency mechanism for key leaders in different agencies to meet regularly to devise solutions to the issues posited by this advisory council. And then the third is that it would seek to have some entity analyze all of the nonprofit data that the federal government currently collects about its grantees and beyond, and to seek to make some analysis, some comprehensive analysis of all this data, so that members of Congress and policymakers can have a better, a more informed, can make decisions on policy matters with a much more informed data than they currently do. So I think it's been pushed by Senator McCollum. Her staff has been particularly active in it, and I think there are a number of groups, both the federal and the state level, who have been working with that office. So
Scholars are particularly interested in this because the lack of reliable data and statistics. This is understood to be a number of folks who are doing academic work in the area are interested in the bill because it would, for the first time, really bring together in one place and in one fairly comprehensive way the data about the sector that otherwise we're kind of putting together on a very piecemeal basis.
So back to, I have just three more key takeaways because I have to get to 10. The seventh is, even though we saw a lot of moderates losing from both parties in this midterm election, I think that the run-up to the 2012 is also going to create a much more polarized Congress. I think moderate Republican members are going to be looking over their shoulders at some Tea Party challenges in the primaries for 2012, and that will necessarily pull them and their policies and their ideologies a little bit more to the right. Democrats up in 2012 from traditionally red states or leaning red states started campaigning as soon as the polls closed on Tuesday. So who are some of these folks? Well, you've got Senator Kent Conrad from North Dakota in a red state, Senator Claire McCaskill from Missouri, traditionally more of a red state, Ben Nelson from Nebraska, John Tester from Montana, and Jim Webb from Virginia. All of these folks are going to be taking a hard look at just what happened in their election, perhaps either moving to the left a little bit more or moving to the right. So let's get to key issues, the last takeaway for 2012. I agree in large measure with Pat about some of the key issues. I think I've identified three of them. The first is this blurring of the lines between the nonprofit sector and the for-profit sector. I think some of this has been raised in the context of the healthcare bill and of these healthcare exchanges that are largely going to be run by nonprofits, but fill a traditionally for-profit role. I think the Finance Committee, from my discussions with them, are going to take a closer look at those lines between for-profit and nonprofit entities. The second issue is, which it also has come about largely as a result of the healthcare bill, is whether there needs to be a similar community standard or public good standard for all nonprofits as there currently is for nonprofit hospitals. And then the third issue is this increasing pressure on Congress by interest groups to push for a new hierarchy of charities. Who are the deserving charities and who are the undeserving charities? Who are the SOBs, the symphony, the opera, and the ballet, and then who are truly the deserved? And I think those are discussions that are appropriate for Congress, because Congress is charged with defining who is a charity and who is not. And all of these issues, I think, really warrant our clear attention and really call for increased interaction with our members of Congress to make sure voices and perspectives are heard. So thank you very much.
Carry that.
Ah, yes. The election. Some very reasonable people got elected. They're going to come and work hard on legislation. Where they hit bumps in the road, they're going to work civilly to come up with reasonable compromise. The country will prosper. The U.S. will go through a new renaissance, both domestically and internationally. Nah. Welcome to the nightmare. The nightmare, as you've listened to all of the speakers so far, I can summarize virtually all of the actions in probably one word: gridlock. There is no way that a ultra-conservative House of Representatives is going to be able to amass 60 votes in the Senate for anything. And if they do, to come back with something really outrageous, you think President Obama is going to sign that? And if he vetoes it, do you think there's enough votes for an override? That puts in jeopardy virtually all legislation over the next period of time. That's the situation. I mean, in the last year, we haven't even been able to do spending bills. And that's with a fully Democratic-controlled Congress. Imagine what it's like when you have intense contention. And add what we just heard is that already we have the lens of 2012 put onto all of it. Okay, so the real question is, to what extent are the people who are coming here going to think they came in with a mandate for change that's based on less spending, less regulation, and less government? Pat says that the real issue in the election was around jobs and the economy. Well, no one really knows exactly. The exit polls were certainly confusing, and most of the polling data came back was bewildering. A good example, Dean spent a lot of time talking about health care. It was pretty well evenly split on the exit polls. People voted for a Republican because they didn't like Obamacare. They voted against the Republicans because they wanted Obamacare. So, I don't know. You know, it's clear that there's a lot of apprehension, frustration out there, but it's hard to define what it is. You know, for example, the tax cuts. Well, there are about 37% in the exit polls that wanted to continue the Bush tax cuts for everyone. But there's a majority that either wanted just the tax cuts for the middle class or wanted to kill all Bush tax cuts. So it's very confusing to read this. Very, very confusing. So what does this all mean for the nonprofit sector? Well, I think, Bill, you had mentioned Rick Cohen's article in the Nonprofit Quarterly. What you didn't mention about it is that his feeling is the people who are coming in really don't understand the nonprofit sector. And so that the education effort that all the other panelists were talking about will be important. I wrote a piece that's going to be appearing in the Nonprofit Times that lays out much of what I'm going to say. And in essence, it really comes down, from my point of view, to what I'll call the 3 Ds. The first is defunding, the second is deregulation, and the third is devolution. So let me start on the defunding. If you buy into the Pledge to America, and I brought along an analysis of it that OMB Watch did, and you can grab it, what you will see at a time where nonprofits are relying, for example, on Recovery Act dollars, the first step will be to rescind what dollars are out there. What was announced this morning from the incoming Republican leadership, as a first step, will be to take $25 billion out of the emergency fund for people who do not have jobs. A second step will be to, as Pat said, roll back the dollars to the fiscal year '08 levels. The focus on that will be on discretionary spending, because that's what Congress has the authority to deal with. The third thing will be to add what they're called hard caps. Those aren't defined yet, but they're clearly aimed, again, at discretionary spending. And the fourth item in the pledge is to have one spending cut a week brought to the House floor. Now, in addition to that, since the pledge, we've also heard about adding in constitutional balanced budget amendments. Now, in light of what I just said about gridlock, it's unlikely a lot of these are going to happen. However, if you're a nonprofit out there and you're trying to run, say, a human services delivery program of some type, and you're not sure what kind of budget the government's going to come out with, you can't really do any planning. You can't predict what to do. All you're faced with right now is what we saw from the Urban Institute study is there's increased demand, and roughly about 42% of those that were surveyed by Urban Institute said they're in deficit situation. They're laying people off. So it's a pretty bleak picture on the spending front. Now, some of you may say, well, we don't rely on government money, but you get money oftentimes through a state or a locality, which are also funneled through the feds. And on top of it, even if you don't get any government money, we're talking about increased demands, and where are you going to get the resources? Everyone's going to philanthropy to try and get the dollars. It just isn't there. Doing more with less can only go so far. Eventually, you have to do everything with nothing. Okay, so that's the defunding. Second area is deregulation, which is paid much less attention to by nonprofits. And nonprofits have a love-hate relationship with regulation. We hate it when it affects us, but many of our organizations are heavily dependent on regulation in order to protect the people and the missions we care about. Think about environmental issues. Think about workplace safety concerns. Think about consumer protections. We've gone through a long spell where the federal government has rolled back regulation, and then the Obama administration comes in and starts to bring back a regulatory apparatus. Well, in the Pledge to America, it is go back to an anti-regulatory environment. It is one in which it says that Congress would ideally like to review every rule that has $100 million annual impact per year. That really puts the strings, if they can get that in law, that puts the strings on the administration. That means affirmatively approving everything that Dean said use the levers of the executive branch. There's another kind of regulatory apparatus that they would like to do in Congress, and that is establish sunsets. Now, it's unclear what bill they will choose, but there have been a couple bills introduced in past years. What the sunsets would do, in essence, is any range of all regulations, all programs, all departments would be reviewed periodically, and in some models, depending on the recommendation from the Sunset Commission, if Congress does not affirmatively vote to support the continuation of that regulation program or department, it is eliminated. Another version is like the military base closure process, which is to take the independent recommendations and put it on a fast-track, non-amendable process through Congress. Bottom line is, we are looking at governing mechanisms that really will shake things up. The third area is devolution. The folks who are coming in, this is not just about old school federalism of pass some things back to states. This is a way of governing. This is a new philosophy that goes back. I don't know if you can do that, but it is a new philosophy that goes all the way back to our founding fathers. It is the debate that existed at the formation of our country. What the new players want to do is emphasize the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment, is a refresher, is the one that says if Congress doesn't specifically, well, it doesn't use the word specifically, but if Congress does not grant the authority to do some work, then that power is reserved to the states or the people. What they want to do is every bill that comes forward to have Congress specifically identify the constitutional precept that specifically authorized the action for this, whatever this is. So it is not about just one bill to try and shift responsibility to states. It is about a new governing philosophy. Now, all of this comes at a time when states are enormously stretched thin, both in terms of money, regulatory ability, and taking on new responsibilities. The first test, one of the early tests, I should say, of this new kind of arena of the 3Ds will be a debt ceiling bill. What the heck do you care about a debt ceiling bill? Well, the issue is that if Congress does not approve an extension of the federal debt, government will shut down. This is precisely what the Tea Party activists were interested in, is real leverage. But as many of you in this room remember, the last time this debate came up was between Speaker Newt Gingrich and President Bill Clinton, where government shut down for 21 days over the issue of the size of government, and who lost was Speaker Gingrich. So the establishment Republican side is going to be very wary of this. The Treasury Department says that the debt ceiling is going to have to be extended either in the first quarter or the second quarter of next year. So either the Tea Party activists really put the heavy lever on to say, we want it shut down, or an alternative might be to compromise and come up with exactly the kinds of legislation I just talked about as linked to the extension of the debt ceiling. That is, you may see something like a sunset commission or massive budget cuts or something that they cannot get through because of the gridlock I described, but on a must-pass piece of legislation, they may find ways to hook those on. So I think for those of us in the nonprofit sector, I think we should look with wide eyes at something that seems pretty abstract to us, which is something like the debt ceiling issue. One final comment I would make about the election, besides being bleak, is that I think, and I'm only talking now about the federal, what I want to do as my last point is talk a little bit about what happened in the gubernatorial and the state legislative bodies. This is a period during which we're going through redistricting. And there was a significant shift in the same way there was a significant shift in the House of Representatives. That shift is likely to mean that there is a long-term impact, at least a decade's worth, on much of what we are seeing or about to see in the way Washington works. For example, 5 of the 9 largest states are now fully in control, all houses and the governor's office, with the GOP. Now, that may not be bad, but if it is by the Tea Party perspective and the anti-government sentiments, then it has my ire. It has my deep concern about what the fate of what's going to happen, not only at the state level, but at the federal level. So I'm going to conclude with, I'd rather go back to my daydream of, reasonable people coming, and we will go through a new renaissance. But unless all of us in this room, regardless of our ideology, come together to begin talking about the need for a responsive government in reasonable ways, we are going to face very, very bleak times for the nonprofit sector.
Okay. We've talked around, and Gary, you of course have a particular stake in this issue. We've talked a bit about the advocacy. Sandra talked about it, Pat talked about it, and Dean talked about it, and the prospect for action or not. Do you, in your fears, Gary, about this new Congress, are you at all fearful of some step to roll back the advocacy role of nonprofits? And Pat and Sandra, how do you? I mean, is that what is that the direction you see, or possibly is there a new sort of liberality with regard to the activism of nonprofits. I mean, we do, in fact, on the other side of the electoral thing, we have churches, right, that are trying to bring test cases around the ban on political activity by churches. So perhaps this is a time when those limits, what many people regard as artificial limits, will be challenged. But how's that all going to shake out? The three of you.
Well, let me make 3 points. One is, if in fact it is true what Rick Cohen in the Nonprofit Quarterly's assessment comes out as, which is that many of the new members really don't understand the nonprofit sector, I'm very nervous about talking about opening up anything with regard to advocacy. It suggests to me that what Pat implied is probably a better approach, which is to begin a process of educating a lot of these new members around what the role of the C3 community is versus a C4 versus on down the line of the C categories. It's extremely confusing. I remember one senator who was a knowledgeable player on this, a leader, walking with him towards the Senate floor, and him at the last second saying, "Remind me again the difference between C3 and C4." This is a perennial problem we all have. Reporters don't remember the differences at all. So opening up the lobby rules at this point, I'm not too certain. On the executive branch side, which was Dean's suggestion, I think I would be hopeful that we should all, everyone in this room, again, regardless of political ideology, we should be thinking about how to take the ambiguity out of the nonpartisan political activity rules. They should be as clear as the lobbying rules. We should be able to know that we could do A, B, or C and not run afoul of regulations. So that would be a suggestion. I think if I were to put any energy, it would be over in that front.
Well, I think there's several things getting ready to start. And a request was just submitted by Citizens United to the Federal Election Commission. There's a comment period open right now. They are clearly going to be issuing some regulations. There is likely to be some activity over at the Internal Revenue Service. They've always been very, it's a nice word to use, cautious about investigations of nonprofits and churches or any other kind of nonprofits engagement, but I think there are clearly going to be calls. So whether or not there's the environment to do any legislative fixes, I think there's going to be work at the regulatory level. The other side of this is something that, in this, and I hear absolutely clearly what Gary's saying about the likelihood of legislation getting passed, but some legislation will have to push through. They got to keep the government operating. And I think my greatest caution and fear is the middle of the night changes that will happen when our sector is looking the other way, that could come into attachments to appropriations bill that restrict advocacy rights, that could come all kinds of ways. And I just think that the need for vigilance, education and vigilance is tremendous.
Yeah, I certainly won't belabor that, but I do think education is critical. I agree that that going in and talking about advocacy and expanding advocacy right now is not your best foot forward, because when you say advocacy, members are automatically going to think about the Chamber of Commerce, and you're now off in a completely different direction. So I think for now, the next couple of months, while the election is still very fresh in members' minds, education about what you do is going to be critical.
Can I tack on one last item related to a point, sort of a non sequitur on Pat, your last comment? I think one area where the incoming players to Washington will have a lot in common with everyone in this room. I think they're eager to have Congress operate in new, more transparent manners. There is going to be much greater interactivity. My guess is we won't see those last second items thrown onto bills. There'll be a 72-hour waiting period to show amendments and to take up floor bills. There'll be new ideas that the Republican incoming transition team is working on of how to make the House operate with more interactivity with groups out off the Hill. So I do think that there will be new ways of operating that will help everyone.
I love that. That's my fantasy.
Yeah, right. Let's go to questions. Terry, please, in the back. Oh, and if we could, we have a microphone, do we not? Yes, we have a microphone. If you could please state your name and affiliation, that would be terrific. Thank you.
Excuse me. I'm Terry Scanlon, Capital Research Center. I just wanted to assure Ms. Reed that Acorn is very much alive. They now have 14 separate chapters in 14 cities that have separated from the national entity. Project Vote, Acorn's Project Vote, was very active last week of the election. It lives well. The head of that she's still under indictment, by the way, from the last election, and she's still going strong. So Acorn is alive. Thank you.
And if Terry has his way, Representative Issa will make sure we all know that.
Right. Yeah. Pablo down here, and then we'll go to. Yeah. Wait, do we need a microphone?
Pablo Eisenberg from the Georgetown Public Policy Institute. The panel has talked about the need to educate incoming new congressmen. How in that process are those with the least amount of power in our society, poor, low income, working class folks, going to have a real say when the overwhelming pressure is going to be from those large institutions which have had the most influence on the new board, universities, hospitals, art. How do the lowly folks get a voice in that education?
And do you want to add on to that, Bob? Or?
Yeah,
Bob Woodson.
as someone, Bob Woodson, President, Center for Neighborhood Enterprise here in Washington, and someone who is not unhappy about the election results, as a leader of a national nonprofit, because I never hear the word innovation mentioned. And a lot of the organizations that we represent, the kind Pablo is, the low income, they have been disadvantaged by the current arrangement, the state regulations, where the traditional professional organizations are working with state regulate out of existence some of the local organizations. For instance, the state of Texas and other states working with the medical group prohibit faith-based drug and alcohol treatment people from operating. And they tried to shut them down. So I think in this new environment, perhaps there's an opportunity to devolve responsibility beyond the traditional professional organization down into the neighborhood where people live. That's where charity used to be dispensed in the 30s and 40s prior to the 60s. That's where most of the charity used to be dispensed by organizations closest to people, and it has evolved away from them with devastating results. So perhaps under this new political arrangement, we'll see a change, a devolution back beyond government, but to institutions in those communities.
And I think Dean Zerbe's comment, his presentation was getting at this a bit. I mean, his outrageous, as he puts it, his outrageous notion that the charitable sector should be charitable. It's not. And going to Rick Cohen's article, which is a terrific article. It's been referred to several times. Go to Nonprofit Quarterly website. Sea Change, I think, is the name of is the title, and he goes through the virtue of it is that he goes through the congressmen, the new Congress people who are coming in, and sort of looks at their background with the nonprofit sector, what their experience is. And what you find is it's not that they're unacquainted with the charitable sector, it's that they're acquainted with charity as it is traditionally understood. They're acquainted with small town charities, chambers of commerce, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, boys clubs, girls clubs, that sort of thing. What they don't understand are these enormous, big, and this is where Dean then picks up. What they don't necessarily understand are these enormous, by all indications, profit-making nonprofits like universities and hospitals. They're going to encounter that when they come to Washington, and the lobbying pressure from those institutions. They're going to encounter that for the first time. So for the question is, I guess, are we going to be trying to educate them into an understanding of charity that is somehow contrary to the nature of the sector, which is, in other words, they understand small groups, they understand small town America. What they don't get is, the non-profit status of a huge university that can buy and sell everyone in this room several times over.
I'm not sure that's true, Bill. I think that just as there are as many members of Congress and their staff, there are as many different interpretations of who and what the nonprofit community is. I think back years ago when I was running a campaign in Colorado about a ballot initiative that there were lots of folks who had their own ideas about who should and shouldn't be exempt from property taxes. And we realized that, there were 83% of the voters who said that they or somebody in their family had donated time or money to a nonprofit. And we needed them to make that connection between the organization they knew and this bigger sector. There are also, though, it's, and I don't disagree, Mr. Woodson. I'm a huge believer in recognizing that faith-based organizations were, in fact, those who delivered social services long before our government ever got involved. And it's that partnership, and how do we strengthen that partnership going forward? It's a pretty critical question. And just one final thing, and that's Pablo. How do you provide voice to folks who are voiceless right now in so many circumstances? And I don't think that we have a set education program that this is the nonprofit sector. It's got to come from individual organizations and their volunteers. And there are some incredible movements going on right now. The Marguerite Casey Foundation is one that comes to mind in terms of empowering families, of really helping people. And that, to me, is one of the strengths of nonprofit organizations, is that we have the power to allow the people that we work with to inform them about ways that they can express their own voices. And that, there is no single answer to any of these points.
If I could just jump into and I respond to your question, I don't necessarily think it's as bleak as you believe. I know that through my work at the Philanthropy Roundtable, we have regularly brought groups like, to your point, gospel rescue missions, rural charities to Washington because of because a lot of the foundations are funding these privately, and brought them around to members of Congress. We have an active outreach to the smaller charities around the country that do receive some money from the private sector, and try to bring those voices to Washington so that members of Congress understand that when you say charity, it's not just government-funded or federal grantees, but there is a very large segment of the charitable community that receives a substantial amount of their contributions from the private sector. And because of that, it allows them to be a bit more creative and innovative because they're not necessarily restricted by some of the requirements put on by the federal government. So I don't think it's as bleak. We can always do more. We can always do better.
Just to be controversial.
No.
Bob, I believe in local flexibility, but I also believe in something called the United States, meaning that I really don't want to see someone receive vastly unfair and different kinds of services in one state versus another state. I do want some national standards. Now, there's overbearing standards, and I would agree with you that there are times where the government may tilt too far one way. But the notion of abdicating federal responsibilities to set standards is one that is a rush at times to the bottom. And that I will fight as long as I can with as much passion as I can to make sure that we come up with fair, universal approaches. Having said that, my nervousness about the incoming crowd, it isn't the debate we're starting to have about local flexibility or even faith-based that you've raised. Or, I'm sorry, you raised the local. I'm sorry, you raised the faith. My concern is that the people coming in are really anti-government in mindset. And that's what I want to challenge. I think there's a rightful role of the government to help serve people of all stripes, whether it's low income, whether it's on environmental issues, whether it's on the issues of humanities. I think that helps us as a nation be stronger.
Got a question right here, please, in the center. Yes.
Hi, my name is Carl Sandberg. I've worked as a volunteer for many different nonprofits, but I've also worked as a consultant to some. And in hearing this wonderful panel discussion, I've heard about gridlock and other things. I'm just wondering, are there some nonprofits that would actually profit out of the gridlock? And if so, who are they? And then if really there aren't many, then is there, for lack of better words, is an advocacy position of everybody in this room from a policy standpoint to talk to congressmen and senators about working together? And if they fail to do that, then they are not working for the contiguous United States of America.
You know, when you say gridlock, another way to say gridlock is status quo. Gridlock is no changes. That's not all bad. There are plenty of policies that that are terribly crafted or well-intended, but not necessarily thought through. And so gridlock and status quo is not necessarily a bad thing. In some cases, it can prevent a world of hurt. And we've seen bills, including the Pension Protection Act, that was partly aimed at the nonprofit community. We would have liked to have seen a little bit more gridlock in the passage of that particular bill.
Anyone else?
I agree with your point about coming together on that. I do agree with Bill's point that there are some conglomerates, if you will, at the national level, and that's at the state level too. I don't necessarily just reserve it to national. There are corporate nonprofits in the sense of big business, if you will, and many of them will thrive equally as well in this environment. I mean, isn't it ironic that the target of the spending cuts is discretionary spending when virtually everyone in this room we all know the dynamics that are going on. It is largely healthcare entitlements that are driving the cost over a long haul. We all know that. It's how to deal with it is the problem. But what is the target? The target is discretionary spending, which is not really it's fine you got to control some cost somewhere, but that's not the real issue. So I think those groups who are heavily dependent on maybe the ones Dean mentioned are going to do okay. Maybe.
More questions? Yes, I believe you were in line here.
My name is Peter Wolf. I've been a fundraiser for the nonprofit sector for the last 20 years. A comment that a brief excursion, that my boss in a brief excursion into the for-profit sector made once has stuck with me, and that is, why do employees of nonprofits get paid? It seems to me that this issue of education of congressmen is a symptom of a failure on the part of the nonprofit sector to educate the public at large about who we are, what we do, what kind of contribution we make to the culture, what kind of contribution we make to the economy, to the job sector. The public at large has no understanding of this at all. And I would make the plea that we not restrict our education efforts just to these incoming congressmen. They're going to be here for 2, 4, 6 years, but to the public at large. And I think there are a number of nonprofit organizations, AFP, and the sector, even the Council on Foundation, can do a better job of that than any of them are doing.
I hear what you're saying, and I have thought about this a lot over the last 30 years. One of the difficulties is that in the nonprofit sector, we are never going to have the dollars of a Disney or a Walmart to devote to a public education campaign over the airwaves. I don't dispute that we all need to do a better job of educating the public, educating our elected officials. But I also know you have to start somewhere. And I think about the work that we recently did with healthcare, where, we went to the administration and members of Congress about a provision that they were going to do to help small for-profit businesses provide health care to their employees. And we kept saying, well, the tax credit's nice, except do you understand that tax-exempt employers who employ 1 out of 10 Americans cannot use that? So one by one, and we were able to convince them to adopt a credit that would in fact be able on equitable terms for nonprofit and for-profit employers. That's going to make a huge amount, some $250 million at very conservative estimates per year. So, I think that in the dream of creating this big education program, which independent sector has tried various times in its 30-year history, with varying degrees of success, that we can't lose sight of start where you can, and let's at least make sure that those who are in office right now understand who we are.
Yeah. Anyone else? No? Okay. Next question, please. This gentleman right here.
Hi, my name is Oliver Scardo, and I've sat on the boards of many tiny nonprofits. I'd just like to comment that the word charity has been thrown out a lot, and a lot of nonprofits today are the institutionalization of social movements whose point was solidarity and not charity. So a lot of the whole model of like service delivery to the other person is outdated and simply not good. So I think a lot of this gridlock and even a lot of the funding of these nonprofits will be good for giving energy back to social movements, in the sense that it will purge the sector from a lot of people who never had the interest of the people who these nonprofits are supposed to serve.
So you're suggesting that the discussion overlooks the status of nonprofit as manifestation of social movement, as opposed to mere service delivery. Is that? Yeah. Reaction to the.
Make a great point. That's part of this history of this the movement of nonprofits is much more than charity. So thank you for that comment.
And we are a diverse community. That's our strength. That diversity of being service delivery and being advocacy and being movement builders, that's what makes us such a powerful, to me, that's what took the Tocqueville by such astonishment of how diverse and how important the notion of association is in many facets. I think what is hard today, and what I'm talking about with the incoming leadership, is I'm not sure. I think we, the nonprofit sector, are a non sequitur to their policy agenda forthcoming. And that's what I'm saying. If there's an education process that needs to be done, it's to acquaint them how integrated we are into so much of what the policy implications have. That's what I was really trying to say.
Last question. Just skip the microphone.
McCollum's nonprofit bill. It's
Yeah.
HR 5533 for anyone who wants to look it up. So it's not a question. Commenting.
Gotcha. And the title of it is?
I don't know the title.
Oh, okay.
Nonprofits in the title. So
right.
The Nonprofit Sector and Community Solutions Act.
There you are.
Something snappy.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, it's HR 5533, and I think right now it has like 20 co-sponsors. I think so. Right now they're.
Well, I would add that the Congresswoman and her staff are looking right now for feedback from our community about places that we think the bill needs to be changed, strengthened, weakened, whatever, because it is her intent to reintroduce in the next session, but she wants to make improvements.
Gotcha. And very good. Yeah.
And we have, I just want to say,
yeah, Gary, we've got.
I should have put it out on the front table and forgot.
Right. Yeah, please, and this is the analysis of the
pledge.
The pledge, right.
The pledge.
The pledge.
Yes.
OMB's analysis of the pledge. And analysis.
No, it's the analysis of the pledge.
And analysis of the pledge. Okay. Let's thank our panel for a terrific conversation. Yeah.